Welcome to the Read Multiplex podcast. Today we are looking at, a really profound, almost unsettling realization about the world around you.
Yeah, it's one of those things that once you see it, you really can't unsee it.
Exactly. We are diving into part 18 of Brian Remmel's sweeping, masterful series on readmultiplex.com. It's titled, You Have 5,000 Days Till the End of Work as We Know It, The Hidden Sacristy Architect. Okay, let's unpack this.
We really need to, because the scope here is massive.
Right. We are going to explore a hidden architecture that dictates how you live. The core premise today is something that affects you from the moment you wake up to the way you look in the mirror to the specific anxieties you feel when you walk down a grocery store aisle.
Those everyday moments.
Yeah. That fundamental consumer mindset we all walk around with, that persistent whisper that you need to buy something to feel whole or successful or attractive. None of that was a natural human evolution. It wasn't an accident of history.
No, not at all. It was carefully, scientifically, and deliberately manufactured.
Exactly. Manufactured. And Brian's work provides a totally unique, frankly, mind-bending way to understand our own insecurities. We are going to unmask the architect of those desires.
What's fascinating here is how Brian Remmel acts as an investigative historian in this text. He's connecting these massive economic shifts from the 1920s and post-World War II America to a very hidden, almost invisible psychological blueprint.
He really pulls back the curtain.
He does. He takes us into the literal boardroom meetings where our modern insecurities were designed by hand. But what makes this deep dive so crucial is the duality of the timeline.
Right, because we aren't just staying in the past.
Exactly. Brian takes this historical revelation and projects it forward into our immediate future. Specifically, this impending age of abundance that we are rapidly approaching over the next 5,000 days.
So it's a look back, but also a look forward.
Yeah. On one hand, we are looking backward at a grand psychological manipulation. On the other, we're looking forward to a world where artificial intelligence, robotics, and limitless energy are going to completely shatter that exact manipulation.
We are standing on the precipice between a fabricated past and a deeply liberated future.
That's a great way to put it.
I want you, the listener, to do something for a second. I want you to imagine your deepest, quietest insecurities. Think about that lingering guilt you might feel when you sit on the couch and feel like you, aren't working hard enough.
Or the anxiety surrounding body image.
Right. Or those sudden, overwhelming urges for retail therapy when you are having a rough week. What if I told you that you didn't invent those feelings?
That someone else put them there.
Exactly. What if I told you that a man named Ernest Dichter literally designed those exact feelings in the mid-20th century, specifically to sell soap and cake mix?
It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's just documented history.
It is. That is the journey we are taking today. But to truly grasp the magnitude of this psychological heist, we have to set the stage. We need to go back to the actual birth of the consumer.
Because for most of human history, that wasn't even a thing.
Right. As Brian lays out, that concept didn't even exist. Before World War I, humans simply weren't viewed as consumers. We were producers, or we were citizens. Buying things wasn't an identity.
It's true. The shift in identity from citizen to consumer is basically the foundational block of modern society. In the 1920s, we saw the aggressive rise of what became known as the new economic gospel of consumption.
The new economic gospel. Just the name alone tells you everything.
Yeah, it became a religion. After the First World War, America experienced this massive wave of industrial capacity. Factories were incredibly efficient. But, and here's the catch, efficiency creates a problem.
Overproduction.
Exactly. If you make 1 million shoes, you need people to buy 1 million shoes. So the messaging from business leaders had to fundamentally change. Buying goods was no longer just a simple transaction for something you physically needed. It was suddenly promoted as a patriotic duty.
It's crazy to think about buying a toaster as patriotic.
But that's how it was framed. And crucially, the 1920s introduced the massive expansion of credit. Installment plans became available for cars, radios, household appliances. Suddenly, you were encouraged to buy things you didn't have the cash for right that second.
It's like we received a massive software update for society.
Oh, software update. Yeah.
We went from a save and build operating system where virtue was found in thrift and producing value to a spend and consume operating system where virtue was found in acquiring new things.
Advertising experienced an absolute boom during this time. You even had consumer activism arising, ostensibly educating people on spending wisely, but ultimately just reinforcing the idea that their primary role in the world was to spend.
So by the end of the 1920s, Consumerism had shifted from an elite novelty to a core aspect of American identity.
Right. Now, the Great Depression and World War II put a temporary brutal halt to its momentum, but the psychological seeds had been planted. And the real explosion, as Brian highlights, happened in the late 1940s.
The post-WWII explosion. You had all these wartime production factories that were churning out tanks and airplanes suddenly transitioning to making consumer goods.
They had to build something.
Yeah. Between 1945 and 1949, Americans were buying millions of refrigerators, cars, and stoves. The GI Bill and the new highway systems fueled the explosive growth of the suburbs. It created this astronomical demand for homes and appliances.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the collective psychology of the populace at that exact moment. You have an entire generation suffering from a collective, unspoken PTSD.
They had just been through hell.
Absolute hell. They survived the grinding poverty of the Great Depression, followed immediately by the horrors and the strict rationing of a global war. Then suddenly, the war is over, the troops are home, science and technology are rapidly advancing, lifting a massive amount of people into the middle class.
They were getting their very first taste of abundance. It must have felt miraculous.
It did. But Brian makes a critical, vital distinction here in his text. This was a false abundance.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second. Why call it a false abundance? There was actual, tangible wealth being created. People had houses, cars, indoor plumbing, food security that their parents never dreamed of. That sounds like real abundance to me.
The material goods were real, yes. The psychology underpinning it was false.
Okay, unpack that.
True abundance would have leveraged that amazing technology to reduce human toil, granting people more leisure time, more freedom, and less anxiety.
Like Keynes predicted, the 15-hour work week.
Exactly. But that's not what happened. Instead, the public was emotionally and psychologically manipulated to become relentless, anxious consumers. The technology didn't free them. It just shifted their labor into a new gear to afford an endlessly moving goalpost of consumer goods.
Wow. So society could have taken a deeply liberating path with that post-war wealth. Instead, it was hijacked.
The tragedy is that the manipulation worked flawlessly.
And before we pull back the curtain on the man who built that hijacking mechanism, we really need to locate ourselves within Brian Romal's overarching narrative.
Yes, context is key here.
Remember, this deep dive is exploring part 18 of a massive multi-part series on readmultiplex.com. Yeah. For you listening, whether you've been with us since part 1 or are just jumping in now, these first 17 parts are critical because they arm us with the vocabulary to understand the future.
They absolutely do. Brian structures this entire 5,000-day series as a monomythic arc, the classic hero's journey. Parts 1 through 4 outline the call to adventure.
The wake-up call.
Right. This is the initial startling realization of artificial intelligence's massive disruption of labor and the true dawn of abundance. It also covers the refusal of the call how society naturally resists this terrifying change.
Like the player piano analogy Brian uses.
Yes, the disruption caused by the player piano in the early 20th century is a perfect frame for how we instinctively react to automation. We fight it.
Right. And then in parts 5 through 7, the hero, which is you, the listener, crosses the threshold into what Brian calls the interregnum.
The interregnum is crucial to understand. It's the chaotic, terrifying transition period we are entering right now. It's the gap between the old economy dying and the new abundance economy being born.
It's the messy middle.
Very messy. In these parts, Brian dives deeply into the pain of de-skilling. When we talk about de-skilling, think about the anxiety a highly trained graphic designer feels today watching an AI generate a complex logo in 3 seconds.
It's gut-wrenching.
It is. That loss of a premium on your hard-earned skills leads to what Brian describes as the dark night of the soul. It's the profound realization that the old world, the old ways of proving your worth, are fading away forever.
But then moving into parts 8 through 14, the journey enters the ordeal. This is about saving your wisdom. It's the artisan's awakening.
Finding your unique human value.
Exactly. It's the realization that you can actually reverse obsolescence. It's about how to seize the sword and navigate that chaotic interregnum. And most recently, in parts 15 through 17, we started on the road back. Brian illuminated the IBM COBOL shock.
We should briefly explain the COBOL shock for clarity. COBOL is a decades-old programming language that runs a massive percentage of the global financial system. But almost no one alive knows how to code in it anymore.
It's just aging out.
Right. So the shock is the sudden, desperate need to translate these ancient, crumbling legacy systems into modern code. And how AI has suddenly emerged as the bridge to do exactly that, practically overnight. It's a powerful metaphor for how rapidly AI can solve deeply entrenched structural problems.
And Brian paired that with a profound warning about the Universe 25 mouse utopia.
Yes, the John B. Calhoun experiment from the 1960s. Calhoun built a literal physical utopia for mice. Endless food, water, perfect climate, no predators.
Sounds great, right?
You'd think so. But he found that without challenges, without a struggle for survival, the mouse society collapsed. They lost their purpose, they descended into behavioral sinks, hypersocial isolation.
The beautiful ones.
The so-called beautiful ones who only groomed themselves and refused to interact. And eventually it led to catastrophic depopulation. Brian uses Universe 25 to warn us about the dangerous pitfalls of modern depopulation narratives.
Because physical abundance without human purpose is a trap.
Exactly. He emphasizes human agency. We are not passive victims of abundance. We must be the actor agents who shape it.
So those 17 installments were a rigorous training ground. They equipped you with the armor needed for what comes next. And that brings us to the discovery in the shadows, meeting the architect of desire.
This is where it gets really cinematic.
Brian's personal discovery of this is a story in itself. Imagine a crisp autumn day in the late 1980s. Brian is wandering the quiet academic halls of the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware.
Just doing pure historical legwork.
Right. He's chasing whispers of corporate secrets, a rumor about a mid-century psychoanalyst who engineered the subconscious drivers of America. An archivist leads him down into these dim, climate-controlled vaults.
The kind of place where history is actually hiding.
The air is thick with that distinct smell of aged paper, and sitting there are 126 unassuming cardboard boxes. There are no glowing artifacts, no gold-embossed covers, just plain boxes labeled the Ernest Dichter papers.
Just sitting there in the dark.
Brian describes pulling out the first folder, expecting dry sales figures and market shares. Instead, he uncovers yellowed memos and transcribed interviews that outline a terrifyingly systematic dissection of the human psyche.
So who is Ernest Dichter? Dichter was a Viennese refugee with a PhD in psychology. He was deeply steeped in the psychoanalytic teachings of Sigmund Freud and Wilhelm Stickel.
The heavy hitters of the subconscious.
Exactly. He fled Nazi Europe in the late 1930s and arrived in America. When he looked at the booming post-World War II American consumer market, he saw something fundamentally flawed in how corporations were trying to sell things.
Because up until that point, classical economics operated on a very simple, logical assumption that people are rational actors.
Right. It assumed that if a company makes a refrigerator that is cheaper, colder, and uses less electricity, a rational consumer will naturally choose it over a worse one.
And Dichter looked at all these companies trying to sell products based on logical utility, and he basically said, you are completely wrong about human nature.
He turned the whole model upside down.
He hypothesized that human buying habits weren't driven by logic or utility at all. They were driven by the exact same dark, unconscious forces that drive human neurosis. He believed we buy things to satisfy the id.
The Freudian id, the primitive, impulsive, chaotic part of the human psyche that is boiling over with suppressed sexual desires, hidden fears, aggressive impulses, and deep-seated anxieties.
And it's important to note that Dichter wasn't working entirely in a vacuum. Brian notes his deep connection to his friend Edward Bernays.
Yes. Brian refers to them as the two-headed snake.
The two-headed snake of modern manipulation.
Exactly. Bernays is a legendary, almost mythical figure in public relations. He was Freud's nephew, actually.
Keep it the family.
Bernays is infamous for campaigns like convincing women in the 1920s to smoke cigarettes in public. At the time, it was a massive taboo.
So how did he do it?
Bernays hired women to march in the Easter Sunday parade smoking cigarettes, and he branded them freedom torches. He bypassed all logic about health or cost and tied a deadly addictive product directly to a deeply emotional, psychological desire for emancipation and gender equality.
It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
It really was. And Ernest Dichter took this underlying philosophy and decided to apply it to absolutely everything in the American household.
So in 1946, Dichter founds the Institute for Motivational Research. But here's the logistical problem. If you want to tap into the id, you can't just hand out a multiple-choice survey at the mall.
No, people will lie.
Right. If you ask people on a piece of paper why they bought a car, they will give you a logical, rational answer. It gets good gas mileage. People don't tell the truth on surveys, mostly because they don't consciously know the truth themselves.
They rationalize it after the fact.
So Dichter pioneers a completely new methodology. He ditches the surveys and creates what he called the depth interview.
The depth interview is the turning point in modern capitalism. These were not quick questionnaires. These were grueling, therapeutic, psychoanalytic probing sessions.
Like actual therapy.
Yes. Dichter's interviewers would sit with everyday consumers for hours in living rooms or focus group facilities, acting essentially as therapists. They would ask subjects to describe a product as if it were a living, breathing person.
If this soap walked into a room, what kind of person would it be?
Exactly. They would have subjects draw pictures or use free association to reveal their subconscious attachments. Brian notes that Dichter conducted over 2,300 of these massive studies for major corporations worldwide.
He essentially turned the human mind, with all its fragile insecurities, into a hackable commodity.
It represents a profound shift in power. Before this era, control over a populace was largely physical, economic, or overtly political. Dichter's methods marked a transition into subtle, invisible psychological programming.
It's invisible control.
Corporations were no longer just selling a product to meet a pre-existing physical need. They were actively manufacturing a psychological deficiency, an anxiety, or a guilt complex, and then seamlessly selling the product as the only cure.
Create the disease, sell the cure. And nowhere is this more evident and frankly more devastating than in how these exact methods were weaponized against women.
It was highly targeted.
I really want to spend significant time here. We cannot gloss over this because the case studies Brian Rommel pulls from those 126 boxes are the core evidence of the manufactured mindset we're still living with today. Let's start with the 1951 study on synthetic laundry detergents, products like Tide and These were absolute scientific miracles for the time. Before them, doing laundry was backbreaking, multi-day physical labor.
It was exhausting work.
Right. These synthetic detergents cleaned faster, they were vastly more efficient, and they saved hours of time. But when they hit the shelves, housewives violently resisted buying them. They stuck to their old, grueling methods.
The rational economic model completely failed to explain it.
The product was undeniably, objectively better. So, the soap companies hire Dichter. He brings women in for his depth interviews to find out why they are rejecting a miracle.
What Dichter uncovered in those deeply probing interviews is unsettling. He found that for generations, a woman's entire self-worth in a traditional household was intrinsically structurally tied to the physical exertion and the suffering of her domestic work.
Her suffering was her value.
Exactly. Her value to her husband, her family, and her community was measured by how hard she scrubbed the floors and the clothes. Therefore, a product that suddenly made the work easy didn't feel like a technological relief. It felt like a moral failing.
It felt like a sin.
Yes. The detergent subconsciously made these women feel lazy, irrelevant, and inadequate as homemakers. They were experiencing a profound, culturally induced epidemic of guilt simply for wanting an easier life.
Wait, let me just pause and play devil's advocate for a second. Was Dichter actually creating this insecurity, or was he just acting as a mirror? Wasn't he just finding the guilt that society had already placed on these women and pointing it out to the brands?
That is the exact defense the advertising industry has used for decades. We just give people what they want. But Brian's deep dive reveals that it wasn't just mirroring. It was active weaponization.
He used it against them.
Dichter didn't just find the insecurity and say, hey, maybe society should value women more. He advised companies to frame their products in a way that actively exploited and maintained that insecurity. Look at his solution for the detergent.
Right. What did he tell them to do?
He didn't tell the soap companies to lower the price. He told them to radically change the marketing. He advised them to market the synthetic detergent not as a chemical utility, but as magic.
Magic. And by framing the product as something magical, something almost otherworldly, it granted the housewife moral permission to use it.
It absolved her.
It bypassed her guilt. It gave her an excuse to tell herself and her peers, I'm not being lazy, I'm using this incredible modern magic. Sales absolutely soared, the brands won, but the psychological cost to the consumer was massive.
Huge cost.
It embedded a woman's self-value directly into her consumption of a corporate product, rather than her inherent capability as a human being.
We see the exact same psychological mechanism in the famous Betty Crocker cake mix story. Early instant cake mixes were absolute marvels of mid-century convenience.
They were practically foolproof.
The box contained dehydrated flour, sugar, baking powder, and powdered egg. You literally just added water, stirred, and baked. It was completely foolproof, and it completely flopped on the market.
Women refused to buy it.
Again, logic fails. Why wouldn't you want to save an hour of baking?
Dichter does his depth interviews. He discovers that baking a cake wasn't about making food. It was a profound subconscious symbol of nurturing and maternal care.
It was an act of love. By making it require nothing of tap water, the instant mix made women feel like frauds. It robbed them of their creative, nurturing role in the family. It was too easy, therefore it lacked love.
So Dichter comes up with a solution that is now legendary in the advertising world. He tells the manufacturer to remove the powdered egg from the mix. He tells them to force the housewife to add a fresh egg herself.
Just one simple change.
But the psychology behind why the egg matters is wild. Brian's text reveals that Dichter found the egg carried massive subconscious weight. To the Freudian mind, the egg symbolized fertility, sexual activity, and subconsciously, the biological act of giving birth to the cake.
It sounds absurd to our modern ears, but the psychological barrier was real. The powdered egg made the cake feel sterile and industrialized.
Like a factory product.
By simply forcing the woman to crack a fresh egg into the bowl, it restored her visceral, biological sense of involvement. It restored her domestic self-worth. She wasn't just pouring factory powder into a pan, she was engaging in the alchemy of creation. She was nurturing her family.
It is brilliant marketing, undeniably. But when you realize it is built on exploiting deep-seated cultural anxieties about maternal adequacy, it's chilling.
Very chilling. And he didn't stop at cakes and soap, he went after the entire pantry. Brian found reports showing that Dichter actively gendered food itself.
The gendered food.
He advised companies to promote rice as feminine. It was soft, pliant, and nurturing. Potatoes, on the other hand, were masculine, hearty, strong, and substantial. Meat was marketed as the ultimate embodiment of male strength and dominance. Eggs and dairy were inherently tied to female fertility and maternity.
This wasn't just about selling groceries. Think about the cultural impact. This was about forcing people to affirm rigid societal gender roles with literally every bite of food they took.
Every single meal.
It created an environment where a woman might feel subconscious pressure to choose the feminine rice to reinforce her identity, or feel obligated to serve the masculine red meat to validate her husband's masculinity. It turned the dinner table into a theater of manufactured gender anxiety.
He hijacked the dinner table. And then he took aim at body image. Let's look at the studies he did for Brilli Foundation garments, girdles and bras.
Oh boy.
When Dichter probed women about these restrictive garments, he didn't find practical concerns about the durability of the fabric or the fit. In those depth interviews, he uncovered deep, agonizing fears of inadequacy. He found a desperate desire for control over their aging bodies and deeply suppressed erotic impulses.
So Dichter advised the company to completely abandon marketing these undergarments as practical clothing. Instead, they were to be marketed as emotional talismans.
Magic objects, essentially.
They were promised to be gateways to allure, to empowerment, to confidence. He did the exact same thing with the all-pure wool campaign.
Right. Wool was generally seen as itchy, heavy, and tied to outdated grandmotherly tradition. People in the 1950s wanted the new, modern, easy-care synthetic fabrics like nylon and polyester.
Dichter's solution was to rebrand wool by tapping into the id. He advised marketing it as a highly sensual, deeply feminine, almost erotic indulgence.
It's all about how it makes you feel.
He linked the act of buying and wearing wool to self-pampering, to proving your identity as a refined, sensually awakened woman.
This raises an important question for all of us today. When we look at the modern struggles we see everywhere, body positivity movements, rampant imposter syndrome, the endless, exhausting pursuit of external validation on social media, how much of that is a direct echo, a lingering ghost of these exact mid-century advertising campaigns?
It makes you wonder.
These campaigns literally laid the concrete foundation for the architecture of our modern insecurities.
That is such a powerful question. It really makes you look at your own purchasing habits differently. Are you buying that expensive skincare cream because it works, or because a 70-year-old marketing playbook taught you to fear aging as a loss of your sensual validity?
It's usually the latter.
And Dichter didn't stop with adults. He went right into the nursery to plant these seeds early. Brian's text highlights Dichter's work for Mattel, specifically the redesign of the Barbie doll.
This one is fascinating.
Before Barbie, young girls almost exclusively played with baby dolls.
And the psychological purpose of a baby doll is quite obvious. It was designed to prepare a young girl for her inevitable, culturally mandated role as a mother. It fostered nurturing instincts and domestic readiness.
But when Dichter conducted depth interviews with young girls, he uncovered something entirely different. He found suppressed desires for independence, a yearning for adulthood, and a fascination with idealized glamour.
So Barbie was designed to tap directly into those suppressed desires. With her adult form, her long legs, her careers, and her glamorous accessories, Barbie represented an escape from the domestic confines that the baby dolls represented.
It gave girls a taste of autonomy. It was a double-edged sword, right?
A massive double-edged sword. While it tapped into a genuine desire for independence, it simultaneously embedded a highly specific, largely unattainable standard of beauty and adult glamour deep into the subconscious of generations of young women.
It set a new trap.
Exactly. It essentially replaced one set of domestic expectations with a brand new set of physical and consumer-driven expectations. To be independent, you must also be flawlessly beautiful and own endless accessories.
Even in areas traditionally considered absolute male domains, like the auto industry, Dichter found a way to manipulate the female subconscious to drive sales. Brian found Dichter's studies for Chrysler and Plymouth.
He knew who really made the decisions.
Dichter realized that even if the man was the one signing the check at the dealership, the wife was very often the emotional gatekeeper of the purchase. If she wasn't on board, the sale died.
So he categorized the cars psychologically to play on marital dynamics. He framed convertibles as mistresses. They were exciting, impulsive, slightly dangerous, and youthful.
And the other cars?
Sedans, however, were framed as wives. Reliable, secure, practical, and heavily grounded.
Think about the deeply insidious nature of that framing. He was manipulating the deepest, most vulnerable dynamics of a marriage to sell a hunk of steel.
It's pretty ruthless.
He positioned the wife as the emotional authority who had to navigate these bizarre psychological waters. A man buying a convertible wasn't just buying a fun car to drive on weekends. Subconsciously, the marketing positioned it as him indulging an impulsive, potentially unfaithful desire.
The marketing played right into that tension, forcing the wife to either embrace the mistress energy or demand the security of the wife's sedan.
And finally, consider what he did with ivory soap.
Yes, ivory soap. Dichter transformed a simple, cheap bar of soap from a basic hygiene utility into a profound emotional ritual. He linked the act of bathing with ivory soap to a self-caress, an act of purification.
It was framed as a Puritan-approved indulgence. It had the subtle, private eroticism, but it was safely cloaked in the acceptable idea of purity and cleanliness.
Washing with ivory soap became a way to physically and morally cleanse yourself, washing away whatever daily guilts or frustrations you had accumulated in your domestic duties. It elevated soap into a symbol of a woman's moral self-image.
It is just incredible how deeply he wove these manipulative narratives into the most mundane, everyday objects. But as shocking as all of this is, the cars, the cakes, the soap, Brian Rummel uncovers something in those Hagley vaults that takes this manipulation to a level that is almost hard to comprehend.
We need to talk about the soap opera psyop.
We absolutely do. This is perhaps one of the most revealing and deeply disturbing elements of the entire deep dive. This is where the methodology moves from manipulating the purchase of a specific product to manipulating the actual emotional baseline of millions of women's daily lives.
It's systemic manipulation.
And Brian has a deeply personal connection to this piece of history, which makes it so much more visceral. In his text, he shares a jaw-dropping anecdote from his own father. Brian's dad worked in New York City in the 1960s and 70s, running the in-house cafeterias at CBS studios.
Right at the center of the broadcast world.
Over the years, his dad told him a story about interacting with a specific group of psychologists who were heavily paid by the television networks to consult on the sets of daytime soap operas. One of those consulting psychologists was Ernest Dichter himself.
Now, these psychologists weren't just offering casual, high-level advice about character arcs. Brian's father noted that they consulted on the scripts weeks in advance, and then they were physically present on set during filming to mandate fine touches.
They were on set.
Yes. They wanted to ensure the precise psychological effects they had designed were present in the lighting, the dialogue, and the pacing of every single scene. They had final authority over the emotional direction of the broadcast.
That's incredible. And the stated goal of these psychologists, as relayed directly to Brian's father, is truly chilling. Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly incredibly dark. When Brian asked his dad what their actual goal was, his dad told him it was to make women hate their lives and to have an empty pain that only products could fill.
Just terrible.
To crave a life that would be anything but their family, and to encourage a need to get out, to ultimately promote infidelity. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. They were actively weaponizing television scripts to deliberately induce misery, inadequacy, and marital dissatisfaction in the women watching.
And when Brian, shocked, asked his dad why a network would do such a horrible thing to its own audience, the answer was purely economic.
Always follow the money.
His dad said, this empty feeling would be filled with instant products to feel less guilt about the 3 hours the shows took out of their days.
It is a perfectly engineered, closed-loop system of psychological abuse and financial extraction. They manufacture the emotional pain. They manufacture the guilt of wasting 3 hours watching television instead of cleaning.
And then, seamlessly, during the commercial breaks, they sell the very products, the instant cake mixes, the magical synthetic detergents, the purifying soaps that they themselves have engineered to act as the psychological cure for that exact pain.
It is a stunningly cynical mechanism. They break the bone and then ret you the cast.
And Brian's research in those Hagley vaults completely backed up his father's story. He found Dichter's early 1940s CBS audience research reports. Dichter found that the appeal of soap operas wasn't just the dramatic, twisty plots. The core appeal was heavily rooted in featuring strong, authoritarian heroines who stepped in to resolve the messy, chaotic troubles of weaker characters.
And Dichter actually drew a historical parallel in his reports that terrified the executives at CBS. He compared the psychological dynamic of the strong soap opera heroine alleviating the burdens of weaker characters to Adolf Hitler alleviating the burdens of his followers in Nazi Germany.
Yes. Dichter, a man who fled the Nazis, explicitly noted this dynamic. He wrote that these television heroines provided emotional relief to female listeners of weak character, giving them a sense of vicarious empowerment and authoritarian comfort.
Brian notes that Frank Stanton, the powerful director at CBS, was terrified this fascist comparison would leak to the press and offend their massive corporate sponsors.
But despite the fear, they kept doing it. Because Dichter also framed the soap operas as a form of social therapy, which sounds positive until you hear the mechanics of it.
Social therapy, right.
He theorized that by dramatizing internal marital weaknesses on screen, things like poor communication, financial stress, or emotional distance, it allowed the real-life couples watching to subconsciously project their own issues onto the characters.
A release valve.
Yes. The viewers could vicariously work through their marital problems through the screen without ever having to actually confront their own spouse or do the hard work of real communication.
Which sounds helpful on the surface, like, hey, we're saving marriages. But why did Dichter and the networks want to save the marriages?
Right. What is the motive?
The motive was entirely, ruthlessly commercial. If the marriage breaks up, the household economy shatters. The purchasing power of that family unit is severely disrupted.
A divorced woman in the 1950s buys fewer appliances, fewer cars, and fewer luxury goods.
By using the soap opera to artificially stabilize the marriage, they ensured that the couple remained intact as a stable, predictable, and continuous consumer unit. The marriage was maintained not for love, not for human flourishing, but for economic efficiency.
The women were kept perpetually dissatisfied enough to keep buying the cures during the commercial breaks, but pacified enough by the television heroines to keep the household functioning and the paychecks cashing.
It is mind-blowing. It reframes the entire cultural history of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that when you feel the sudden, hollow urge to buy something to cheer yourself up, you aren't acting on a spontaneous desire. You're running a script that was written for you decades ago by men in boardrooms.
But we can't just leave this in the 1950s and 60s.
No, we definitely can't.
Brian makes it terrifyingly clear that the legacy of Ernest Dichter didn't die when those cardboard boxes were locked away in Delaware. It merely evolved. It moved from the wood-paneled boardrooms of Madison Avenue directly into the algorithms that govern our lives today.
I want you to look at your phone. Think about your social media feeds. Think about TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Brian Rommel points out that Dichter's mid-century tactics are the absolute, undeniable DNA of today's digital world.
That is a critical connection to make. Because what is a social media algorithm, really? It is a digitized, automated, continuously running depth interview.
Wow.
Just as Dichter sat down with housewives for hours to probe their deepest insecurities, today's algorithms track every micro-hesitation. They track every millisecond you linger on an image of a fitness model or a luxury vacation.
They track every scroll, every clicked link, every late-night impulse search.
They are mapping your id in real time on a scale Dichter couldn't have comprehended. And just like Dichter, the tech companies use that map to serve you highly targeted content designed to systematically aggravate your specific insecurities and then immediately serve you an ad for a product or a service that promises to absolve that insecurity.
The mechanism hasn't changed an inch. It has just become infinitely faster, infinitely more pervasive, and completely invisible.
We are swimming in a massive digital ocean of manufactured inadequacy.
And Brian highlights just how powerful people recognized this methodology to be back in the day, long before algorithms existed. In the mid-1950s, during the absolute height of Cold War paranoia, the FBI actually opened a massive file on Ernest Dichter.
The FBI got involved.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Federal agents heavily scrutinized his Institute for Motivational Research. They were initially worried he had communist sympathies, but their deeper, more existential fear was that his mind-hacking techniques could be weaponized by foreign adversaries.
That makes total sense.
The FBI realized that if someone could seamlessly rewire the desires, the fears, and the anxieties of the American public through media and advertising, they could conquer the nation from the inside out without firing a single shot.
The irony there is profound, and Brian captures it perfectly. After a thorough investigation, the FBI cleared Dichter. Because they concluded he wasn't a communist threat aiming to destroy America, rather, they deemed him the ultimate capitalist tool. The government recognized that his psychological engineering wasn't a threat to the economy, it was the very engine of the modern consumer economy.
It proves the sheer, unadulterated power of his methods. He had successfully, legally, turned the American subconscious into a predictable, manageable, and highly profitable commodity.
So what does this all mean for us today? We have spent all this time looking at this incredibly dark, manipulative history. It feels heavy. It feels like we are permanently trapped in this iron cage of manufactured desire.
But this is the Read Multiplex podcast, and Brian Rommel is fundamentally charting a course for the future. The tone of his text takes a massive, profound shift right here. We move from the dark history of the archives to a breathtakingly optimistic, highly technical vision of what is coming next.
And it is coming fast.
Brian reminds us that we are approaching the age of abundance. The interregnum, that chaotic transition period we discussed earlier, spans from roughly 2025 to 2039. He says we have 5,000 days.
The interregnum is the bridge. And on the other side of that 5,000-day bridge is an era fundamentally unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. Brian defines this coming age of abundance by the imminent convergence of several exponential technologies: artificial intelligence, fusion energy, advanced robotics, and biotechnology.
We need to really break down the mechanics of this because it sounds like science fiction, but it is structural economics.
Yes, is very real.
When these technologies fully mature and converge, the foundational economic reality of all human history, which is scarcity, is going to be nearly erased. The basic necessities of human life, food, housing, energy, medical care, and manufactured goods will become nearly freely available. They will become entirely untethered from human labor and traditional cost structures.
Let's really flesh that out for the listener because it's hard to wrap your mind around. Think about the magnitude of that. We have existed for all of recorded human history in a state of scarcity. Everything costs money because everything requires human labor, which is finite.
But imagine a supply chain in the near future. A robotic workforce, guided by superintelligent AI, mines the raw ore. AI-driven logistics networks transport it. Automated robotic foundries refine it into steel. AI architects design a house, and a swarm of construction robots build it.
And the energy required to power every single step of this process comes from commercial nuclear fusion, which provides virtually limitless clean energy at a cost approaching zero.
When you remove human labor and energy costs from the equation, the cost of creating a house or growing a tomato or manufacturing a car plummets towards zero.
Exactly. It completely upends the economic model of the last 10,000 years. So the ultimate question Brian asks, the entire crux of this deep dive, is this: what happens to a psychological manipulation system built entirely on scarcity, guilt, and the need to prove your worth through expensive purchases when scarcity completely disappears?
And the answer is magnificent. It shatters. Dichter's entire meticulously built cage collapses under the immense weight of true abundance.
It has to collapse. His strategies make absolutely no sense in an abundant world. If you think about it, the only reason you need to buy a wildly expensive luxury handbag to prove your social status, or buy a specific brand of marketed soap to prove your moral purity, is because those items are scarce.
They cost money, and money requires your labor, your time, and your sacrifice to earn. The purchase proves your sacrifice.
But when goods are essentially free and infinitely available to everyone, they completely lose their power as status symbols or emotional talismans. You no longer need to buy things to prove your worth to society or to ease your anxiety about your place in the world because the act of acquisition no longer signifies anything.
Brian highlights the profound, deeply liberating shift this will create, especially for women who are the primary targeted victims of Dichter's gendered psyops for decades. In the age of abundance, women will finally, permanently shed this heavy, guilt-ridden consumer identity that was forced upon them in the mid-20th century.
When the societal pressure to find fulfillment in domestic purchases or unattainable marketed beauty standards dissolves, because the economic engine that required that pressure no longer exists, women will be free to become pure creators, explorers, innovators, and healers.
We are going to see a complete societal redefinition of the id. For the past century, corporations have commodified our primal drives. They took our deep human need for love, for security, for community, and for identity, and they packaged it up and sold it back to us as cars, clothes, and cake mix.
But in the age of abundance, our primal drives will no longer be profitable for corporations to manipulate. We won't need them. We will seek true fulfillment not in the aisles of a store or the click of a digital shopping cart, but in intrinsic, profoundly human pursuits.
We will reinvest all that wasted emotional energy into our actual families, our deep relationships, our local communities, our art, and our own personal spiritual growth. The id will finally be liberated from the marketplace.
It is the grand unveiling. Brian's synthesis of the hero's journey brings us to this incredible, triumphant climax. The discovery of those 126 boxes at the Hagley Museum isn't just a grim, depressing warning about our past. It is a literal, tangible roadmap to our freedom.
Brian writes beautifully that history is an active crime scene. We've been walking through this deep dive investigating the exact crime of how our self-worth was stolen from us. But as we step bravely into this coming abundance over the next 5,000 days, we are the detectives unredacting our true selves.
We are looking at the evidence left by Dichter and the advertisers and saying, I see exactly what you did to me, I see how you built the maze, and it doesn't work on me anymore.
It is the epic crescendo of Brian's text. The illusion of the false abundance era, the era of sprawling shopping malls, credit card debt, and targeted algorithm ads, is rapidly falling apart. The compulsion to accumulate, to hoard physical things in a desperate attempt to fill a manufactured psychological void is dissolving.
We're stepping into a new era, not as desperate, anxious consumers trying to devour the world to feel whole, but as empowered, awakened creators ready to shape it. We are reclaiming our sovereignty. We are finally untethering our self-worth from the puppeteers of the past.
This has been an absolutely phenomenal, paradigm-shifting exploration of Brian Rummel's work. It changes the way you view history, the way you view your phone, and the way you view your own mind. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something to chew on as you go about the rest of your day. Tomorrow, or perhaps even later today, you're going to be scrolling on your phone, or you're going to be walking past a brightly lit store window, and you're going to feel a sudden, inexplicable, powerful urge to buy something. You will feel a whisper in your mind telling you that this specific object will make you feel complete, or successful, or secure. When that happens, I want you to pause. Stop right in your tracks. Take a breath and ask yourself, is this my genuine human desire? Or is it the ghost of a 1950s psychoanalyst named Ernest Dichter whispering in my ear from beyond the grave? As we move rapidly into this incredible age of abundance, the most rebellious, powerful, and revolutionary thing you can possibly do is realize you are already enough. Thank you so much for joining us on the Read Multiplex podcast. We cannot wait to have you with us for our next deep dive into the future.